The Derfflinger-class was a class of 3 battlecruisers of the Imperial German Navy. The ships were ordered for the 1912-13 Naval Building Program of the German Imperial Navy as a reply to the Royal Navy's 3 new Lion-class battlecruisers that had been launched a few years earlier. The preceding Moltke class and the incrementally improved Seydlitz represented the end of the evolution of Germany's first generation of battlecruisers. The Derfflinger-class had considerable improvements, including a larger primary armament, all of which was mounted on the centerline, eliminating the restricted arc of the amidships turret. The ships were also larger than the preceding classes. The Derfflinger-class used a similar propulsion system, and as a result of the increased displacement were slightly slower. The class comprised 3 ships, Earthlinger, Lutzow, and Hindenburg. All 3 of the ships saw active service with the High Seas Fleet during World War I. Derfflinger was commissioned shortly after the outbreak of war, and was present at most of the naval actions in the North Sea, including the battles of Dogger Bank and Jutland. Lutzow was commissioned in August 1915, and only participated in the raid on Yarmouth before being sunk at Jutland. Hindenburg was commissioned into the fleet in May 1917, and saw no major action. Derfflinger and Hindenburg were interned at Scapa Flow following the armistice in November 1918. Rear Admiral Ludwig von Reuter, who was in command of the interned High Seas Fleet, ordered the ships to be scuttled in an attempt to prevent the possible seizure by the Royal Navy. Design. The Derfflinger-class battlecruisers were a result of the 4th and final naval law, which was passed in 1912. Admiral Alfred von Tirpitz used public outcry over the British involvement in the Agadir crisis of 1911 to pressure the Reichstag into appropriating additional funds to the Navy. The 4th Naval Law secured funding for 3 new dreadnoughts, 2 light cruisers, and an extra 15,000 officers and men in the Navy for 1912. The 3 dreadnoughts secured in the bill became Derfflinger, Lutzow, and Hindenburg. Designed work on the first 2 ships began in October 1910 and continued until June 1911. Hindenburg was built to a slightly modified design, which was created between May and October 1912. When design work began, the Navy Department was asked to submit new requirements to fix deficiencies found in the preceding battlecruiser classes, which primarily covered propulsion systems and the main armament. Previous battlecruisers used a 4-shaft arrangement for their engines. Reducing the number to 3 would allow the new ships to equip a diesel engine on the central shaft. This would substantially increase the cruising range, and would ease the transfer of fuel and reduce the number of crew needed to operate the ship's machinery. The Navy Department also argued for an increase in the main battery guns, from 28 cm guns to 30.5 cm weapons. This was because the latest British battleships had thicker main belt armor up to 300 mm. Since the German battlecruisers were intended to fight in the line of battle, their armament needed to be sufficiently powerful to penetrate the armor of the British opponents. Weight increases were managed by reducing the number of guns from 10 to 8. The increase in gun caliber added only 36 tons to the ship's displacement. Tirpitz argued against the increase in gun caliber, for he thought the 28 cm gun was powerful enough. A new construction technique was employed to save weight. Previous battlecruisers were built with a combination of transverse and longitudinal steel frames. The Derfflinger-class ships dispensed with the transverse frames and used only the longitudinal ones. This enabled the ship to retain structural strength and a lower weight. As with all preceding capital ships, the outer hull spaces between the hull wall and the torpedo bulkhead were used for coal storage. On the 1st of September 1910, the design board chose the 30.5 cm to be mounted in 4 twin turrets on the centerline of the ship. The armor layout was kept the same as in Seydlitz. In the meantime, pressure from the British public and media had forced the British Parliament to step up shipbuilding. Kaiser Wilhelm II requested that the build time for the new battlecruisers be reduced to 2 years each, as opposed to 3 years. This proved unfeasible, because neither the armor or armament firms could supply the necessary materials according to an expedited schedule. General characteristics: Derfflinger and Lutzow were 210 meters long at the waterline and 210.40 meters long overall. Hindenburg was slightly longer, at 212.50 meters at the waterline and 212.80 meters overall. All 3 ships had a beam of 29 meters, and a draft of between 9.20 meters forward and 9.57 meters aft. The first 2 ships were designed to displace 26,600 tons with a standard load, and up to 31,200 tons at combat weight. Hindenburg displaced slightly more, at 26,947 tons standard and 31,500 tons fully laden. The ship's hulls were constructed from longitudinal steel frames, over which the outer hull plates were riveted. Derfflinger's hull contained 16 watertight compartments, though Lutzow and Hindenburg had an additional 17th compartment. All 3 ships had a double bottom that ran for 65% of the length of the hull. This was a decrease from preceding German battlecruisers, which had a double bottom for at least 75% of the hull. The ships were regarded as excellent seaboats by the German Navy. The Derfflinger-class ships were described as having had gentle motion, though they were wet at the casemate deck. The ships lost up to 65% speed with the twin rudders hard over and heeled up to 11 degrees. This was greater than any of the preceding battlecruiser designs, and as a result, anti-roll tanks were fitted to Derfflinger. The 3 ships had a metacentric height of 2.60 meters. The standard crew for one of the vessels was 44 officers and 1,068 men, when serving as the flagship for the ice scouting group. The ships carried an additional 14 officers and 62 men. The Derfflingers carried smaller craft, including 1 picket boat, 3 barges, 2 launches, 2 yawls, and 2 dinghies. Machinery: by the time construction work on Derfflinger began, it was determined that the diesel engine was not ready for use. Instead, the plan to use a 3-shaft system was abandoned and the ships reverted to the standard 4-shaft arrangement. Each of the 3 ships were equipped with 2 sets of marine-type turbines. Each set drove a pair of 3-bladed screws that were 3.90 meters in diameter on Derfflinger and Lutzow and 4 meters in diameter on Hindenburg. Each set consisted of a high and low-pressure turbine. The high-pressure machines drove the outer shafts while the low-pressure turbines turned the inner pair. Steam was supplied to the turbines from 14 coal-fired marine-type double boilers and 8 oil-fired marine-type double-ended boilers. Each ship was equipped with a pair of turbo-electric generators and a pair of diesel-electric generators that provided a total of 1,660 kilowatts at 220 volts. Each ship was equipped with 2 rudders. The engines for first 2 ships were designed to provide 62,138 shaft horsepower at 280 revolutions per minute. This would have given the 2 ships a top speed of 26.5 knots. During trials, Derfflinger's engines achieved 75,586 shp, but a top speed of 25.5 knots. Lutzo's engines reached 79,880 shp and a top speed of 26.4 knots. Hindenburg's power plant was rated at 71,015 shp at 290 revolutions per minute, for a top speed of 27 knots. On trials she reached 94,467 shp and 26.6 knots. Derfflinger could carry 3,500 t of coal and 1,000 t of oil. At a cruising speed of 14 knots, she had a range of 5,600 nautical miles. Lutzow carried 3,700 t of coal and 1,000 tons of oil, though she had no advantage in range over her sister Derfflinger. Hindenburg also stored 3,700 tons of coal, as well as 1,200 t of oil. Her range at 14 knots was rated at 6,100 nautical miles. Armament: the Derfflinger-class ships were armed with 30.5 cm SKL, 50 guns in 4 twin-gun turrets, 2 forward of the main superstructure in a super-firing pair and 2 to the rear of the ship in a similar arrangement. The guns were housed in DRH-LC 1912 mounts on the first 2 ships, and in DRH-LC 1913 mounts on Hindenburg. The turrets were trained with electric motors, while the guns were elevated hydraulically up to 13.5 degrees. The guns fired 405.5-KILOGRAM armor-piercing shells at a muzzle velocity of 855 meters per second. At 13.5 degrees, the shells could hit targets out to 18,000 meters. The turrets were modified in 1916 to increase the elevation maximum to 16 degrees. This correspondingly increased the range to 20,400 meters. The ships carried 720 shells, or 90 per gun. Each gun was supplied with 65 armor-piercing shells and 25 semi-apt shells for use against targets with less armor protection. The 30.5 cm gun had a rate of fire of between 2 to 3 shells per minute, and was expected to fire 200 shells before replacement was necessary. The guns were also capable of firing 405.9 kilograms high explosive shells. The shells were loaded with 2 RPC-12 propellant charges, a main charge in a brass cartridge that weighed 91 kilograms and a 4-charge in a silk bag that weighed 34.5 kilograms. The propellant magazines were located underneath the shell rooms for the 2 forward turrets as well as the rear super-firing turret. The arrangement was reversed for the rearmost turret. The ships were designed to carry 15 cm SKL, 45 guns, mounted in casemates along the superstructure. Because Derfflinger had to be fitted with anti-roll tanks, 2 of the casemated guns had to be removed to allow enough room in the hull. Lutzow and Hindenburg were equipped with the design number of guns. Each gun was supplied with 160 rounds, and had a maximum range of 13,500 meters, though this was later extended to 16,800 meters. The guns had a sustained rate of fire of 5 to 7 rounds per minute. The shells were 45.3 kilograms, and were loaded with a 13.7 kilograms RPC-12 propellant charge in a brass cartridge. The guns fired at a muzzle velocity of 835 meters per second. The guns were expected to fire around 1,400 shells before they needed to be replaced. The three ships carried a variety of 8.8 cm SKL 45 guns in several configurations. The Derfflinger-class ships were initially equipped with 8 of these weapons, all in single mounts. 4 were placed in the forward superstructure and 4 in the aft superstructure. The ships also carried 4 8.8 cm flak L-45 anti-aircraft guns, which were emplaced around the forward funnel, with the exception of Lutzow, which carried the flak guns around the rear funnel. After 1916, the 4 8.8 cm guns in the forward superstructure were removed. The flak guns were emplaced in MPLC-13 mountings, which allowed depression to -10 degrees and elevation to 70 degrees. These guns fired 9 kg shells, and had an effective ceiling of 9,150 meters at 70 degrees. The ships were also armed with submerged torpedo tubes in the hulls. Derfflinger was equipped with 450 cm tubes. The later ships were armed with more powerful 60 cm weapons. The tubes were arranged with 1 in the bow, 1 in the stern, and 2 on the broadside. Derfflinger's 50 cm torpedoes were the G7 type, 7.02 meters long and armed with a 195 kg hexanite warhead. The torpedo had a range of 4,000 meters when set at a speed of 37 knots, and up to 9,300 meters at 27 knots. The 60 cm torpedoes were the H8 type, which were 8 meters long and carried a 210 kg hexanite warhead. The torpedoes had a range of 6,000 meters when set at a speed of 36 knots, at a reduced speed of 30 knots. The range increased significantly to 14,000 meters. Armor. The Derfflinger-class ships were protected with crop-cemented steel armor, as was the standard for German warships of the period. They had an armor belt that was 300 mm thick in the central citadel of the ship, where the most important parts of the ship were. This included the ammunition magazines and the machinery spaces. The belt was reduced in less critical areas to 120 mm forward and 100 mm aft. The belt tapered down to 30 mm at the bow, though the stern was not protected by armor at all. A 45 mm thick torpedo bulkhead ran the length of the hull, several meters behind the main belt. The main armored deck ranged in thickness from 30 mm thick in less important areas, to 80 mm in the sections that covered the more critical areas of the ship. The forward conning tower was protected with heavy armor. The sides were 300 mm thick and the roof was 130 mm thick. The rear conning tower was less well armored. Its sides were only 200 mm thick and the roof was covered with 50 mm of armor plate. The main battery gun turrets were also heavily armored. The turret sides were 270 mm thick and the roofs were 110 mm thick. On Hindenburg, the thickness of the turret roofs was increased to 150 mm. The 15 cm guns had 150 mm worth of armor plating in the casemates. The guns themselves had 70 mm thick shields to protect their crews from shell splinters. Construction. Of the three ships in its class, only Derfflinger was ordered as an addition to the fleet, under the provisional name K. The other two ships were intended to replace obsolete vessels. Lutzow was ordered as ersatz Kaiser and Augusta for the elderly protected cruiser Kaiser and Augusta, and the contract for Hindenburg was issued under the provisional name ersatz Hertha, to replace the protected cruiser Hertha. Derfflinger was constructed at Bloemen am Voss in Hamburg under construction number 213. She was the least expensive of the three ships, at a cost of 56 million gold marks. The ship was ready to be launched on the 14th of June 1913, but during the ceremony, one of the wooden sledges upon which the hull rested became jammed. It took until the 12th of July for her to enter the water. She was commissioned into the High Seas Fleet on the 1st of September 1914, shortly after the outbreak of World War I. Lutzow was built at the Shore Dockyard in Danzig under construction number 885, at the cost of 58 million gold marks. The ship was launched on the 29th of November 1913, and after lengthy trials, commissioned on the 8th of August 1915. Hindenburg, the final member of the class, was built at the Imperial Dockyard in Wilhelmshaven, under construction number 34. The ship was built at a cost of 59 million gold marks, the most expensive of the three vessels. She was launched on the 1st of August 1915 and commissioned on the 10th of May 1917. Units SMS Derfflinger, named after Georg von Derfflinger, a German field marshal during the 30 Years' War. Derfflinger was commissioned on the 1st of September 1914. A dockyard crew transferred the ship from Hamburg to Kiel via the Skagen. The ship was assigned to the Ice Scouting Group at the end of October. Damage to the ship's turbines sustained during trials prevented the ship from seeing active service until the 16th of November. On the 15th of December, the ship took part in the raid on Scarborough, Hartlepool and Whitby. She was also present during the Battle of Dogger Bank on the 24th of January 1915. The ship was hit once by a 13.5-inch shell from one of the British battlecruisers. In response, she heavily damaged HMS Lion. Repair work was completed by the 16th of February, but Derfflinger's starboard turbine was accidentally damaged on the 28th of June, and the ship was again in the dockyard until August. On the 24th of April 1916, Derfflinger took part in the bombardment of Yarmouth. On the 31st of May, Derfflinger was heavily engaged during the Battle of Jutland as the second ship in the German battlecruiser line. She sustained 21 major hits during the battle, but dealt considerable damage to the British battlecruiser force as well. At 16:26, HMS Queen Mary sank after a magazine explosion that tore the ship apart. She had been targeted with a hail of heavy-caliber gunfire from Derfflinger and Seydlitz. 2 hours later, at 18:30, HMS Invincible suffered a similar fate, though Derfflinger was assisted by her sister Lutzow. During the engagement, Derfflinger had both of her rear turrets knocked out by British gunfire. Her crew suffered 157 men killed and 26 wounded, which was the highest casualty figure for any German ship not sunk. The resilience of the vessel earned her the nickname Iron Dog from her British adversaries. Repair work lasted until the 15th of October, during which the ship had her pole mast removed and replaced with a tripod mast. The ship conducted training operations until November, at which point she returned to active duty with the fleet. Following the German capitulation in November 1918, Derfflinger was interned with a significant portion of the High Seas Fleet in Scapa Flow. On the 21st of June 1919, with the guard ships of the Royal Navy out on maneuvers, Rear Admiral Ludwig von Reuter ordered that the fleet be scuttled. The resulting scuttling of the German fleet saw some 66 vessels of various types sunk. Among those was Derfflinger, which sank at 14:45. The ship was raised in 1939 to be broken up for scrap metal, but the outbreak of World War II intervened. The ship, which remained capsized, was anchored off the island of Riesa until 1946, at which point she was sent to Faslane port, where she was broken up. The ship's bell was delivered to the German Federal Navy on 30th of August 1965. SMS Lutzow. Lutzow was named after Ludwig Adolf Wilhelm von Lutzow, a Prussian lieutenant general who fought during the Napoleonic Wars. The ship was commissioned on 8 August 1915 and then underwent trials. On 25 October, while still running sea trials, Lutzow's port low-pressure turbine were severely damaged. She was sent to Kiel for repairs, which lasted until late January 1916. The ship went on additional trials that lasted until 19 February. Lutzow was by then fully operational, and assigned to the Ice Scouting Group on 20 March 1916. She took part in 2 fleet advances, on 25 March and 22 April, without any major incidents. The following day, on 23 April, Lutzow, along with her sister Derfflinger and the battlecruisers Seydlitz, Moltke, and von der Tann, bombarded Yarmouth. While en route to the target, Vice Admiral Franz von Hipper's flagship Seydlitz was heavily damaged by mines. As a result, Lutzow was transferred to the role of squadron flagship. During the operation, the German battlecruisers encountered British light forces, and a running battle ensued. Lutzow engaged the light cruiser HMS Conquest and hit her several times. At the Battle of Jutland, she was the first ship in the German line, and Hipper's flagship, and drew fire from the British battlecruisers, which included hits below her waterline. Shortly after the start of the battlecruiser action, Lutzow hit her opponent Lion several times. One hit knocked out Lion's Q turret, and the resulting magazine fire nearly destroyed the ship. Shortly after 1900, the armored cruisers Defense and Warrior inadvertently ran into the German line. Lutzow opened fire immediately, followed by several German dreadnoughts. In a hail of shells, Defense's ammunition magazines detonated and the ship was sunk. At around the same time, the fresh battlecruisers of the 3rd Battlecruiser Squadron engaged their German opposites. Between 1926 and 1934, Lutzow sustained 4 12-inch shell hits in her bow from the British battlecruisers. These eventually proved to be fatal. Despite this, at 1930, the combined fire of Lutzow and her sister Derfflinger destroyed the battlecruiser Invincible. By 2015, Lutzow had been hit 5 more times, including hits on her 2 forward turrets. By 2215, Lutzow had shipped nearly 2,400 tons of water, and the ship was dangerously down by the bows. After midnight, attempts were made to steer the ship in reverse. This failed when the bow became submerged enough to bring the stern out of the water. By 2:20, the screws and both rudders were coming out of the water and the ship was no longer able to steer. The order to abandon ship was given, and at 2:47, Lutzow was sunk by the torpedo boat G-38. The ship was lost because the flooding in the boat could not be controlled, the forward pump system failed, and the central system could not keep up with the rising water. A crew was picked up by 4 torpedo boats that had been escorting the crippled battlecruiser. During the battle, the ship suffered 116 men killed. SMS Hindenburg. Hindenburg was the last battlecruiser completed for the Imperial German Navy, and as such had a very short career. She was commissioned 10 May 1917, and was fully operational by 20 October 1917. Too late to see any major action in World War I. On 17 November, Hindenburg and Moltke, along with the light cruisers of the 2 scouting group, were acting as distant support for German minesweepers off the German coast when they were attacked attacked by British battlecruisers. The raid was brief. By the time Hindenburg and Moltke arrived on the scene, the British ships had broken off the attack and withdrawn. 6 days later, Hindenburg replaced Seydlitz as flagship of the ice scouting group. On the 23rd of April 1918, the ship took part in an abortive fleet advance into the North Sea that attempted to intercept an Allied convoy. Moltke sustained mechanical damage while en route, and as a result, Vice Admiral Hipper decided to cancel the operation. On the 11th of August, Hipper was promoted to Admiral and given command of the entire High Seas Fleet. Rear Admiral Ludwig von Reuter replaced Hipper as the commander of the ice scouting group. He raised his flag on Hindenburg the following day. Hindenburg was interned at Scapa Flow, along with her sister Derfflinger and the rest of the German battlecruisers. She was scuttled on the 21st of June 1919, and sank at 1700. Several unsuccessful attempts to raise her were made. On the 23rd of July 1930 the ship was finally raised. From 1930 to 1932 she was scrapped at Rosyth. Her bell was presented to the German Federal Navy on the 28th of May 1959.